Hello and welcome to the Read to Know podcast, where the goal is to actually remember what you read so then you can better apply it to your life. On this podcast, we go through a book one chapter at a time, and then we actually practice remembering what we've read. So if you want to follow along, we're currently working our way through Bob Goff's book, Dream Big. I'm Zach Brown, and my friend Chris Yarber is joining me to help discuss and break down this book. Also, if you're on Apple Podcasts, it would be huge if you left a rating and review for us. It would help out a ton. If you're not on Apple Podcasts, no worries. Just send this to a friend who might be interested. Anyway, thanks again for listening and enjoy the conversation.
So I discovered this morning that I should not ride a scooter anymore.
Okay, well, please explain.
So I got here to the church this morning, went inside, and we have a daycare in part of our building, and some of the younger kids who are part of our youth group came over and was like, hey, we got some scooters outside. You want to go, outside? I was like, yeah, sure, let's go outside. And so I went outside, and we were going down this hill, and we were having fun. So I was kind of pushing myself, and then they wanted to race, and so I raced one of them, and I won. And at the end, at the finish line, so to speak, I decided I would try to pop a wheelie, and when I went up with the front, my back went too far, and I fell. I got boo-boo on my hand and on my knee. And talk about falling flat on your face.
Right. That's what Bob talks about in this chapter.
He does.
Falling flat on your face. Not physically, although that's what you did.
It was.
But sometimes it's physically, sometimes it's not.
Right.
Just depends on the situation. But yeah, that kind of ties into what we're talking about today.
I thought about that as I was reading this chapter in a more literal form, of course. But I love this. I do enjoy this chapter 25. Pick the Vespa, and the subtitle is "We Don't Get Points for Looking the Part." And I certainly did not get points for looking the part on that scooter, because actually what I ended up doing was making more of a fool of myself, which I've found in life when I am concentrated on and try to take the time to look like I really know what I'm doing, it actually ends up working against me and not for me.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to make, because oftentimes we try and look the part, and that sometimes if we're too focused on looking the part, we actually fail in actually, kind of being the part and doing it the right way, doing it right,
Yeah.
And that's what he talks about here. He gives the example that he went to go get his motorcycle license and he had a leather jacket on. He had a Harley, man. He looked cool, but he completely failed the test.
Yeah.
And then he came back like a week or so later with a Vespa here, which if you don't know, I didn't really actually know. I knew it was a motorcycle, but I didn't know what it looked like specifically. If you don't know, Google Vespa so you can see what it is. It's basically a scooter.
Yeah, it's like a moped,
is road
pretty
legal.
much. Yeah, right. Pretty much like a moped. Yeah.
And he came back with that. And he didn't look the part, but he nailed the test,
Right.
And so that's what he said, sometimes we're too concerned with looking the part that we're actually not prepared as we need to be. And we can fail because we're too concerned about how we look to others than the actual skill and competency we're using in that thing or what we're trying to do.
Right. Yeah, from this chapter, of course we learned that one of Bob's ambitions was to get a motorcycle license and to ride motorcycles, and which he does. But to me, I was a little surprised that at first he tried to look the part and then he failed. And what I mean by that is, of course, if we're more concentrated on looking the part, then more times than not we are going to fail. But what I mean by that is typically what happens is when I face failure in my life when chasing an ambition or a dream, if I fail in some way, because he says in here that your failures, your setbacks, they can be, public, big, small, medium, either nobody notices or everyone notices, whatever size it may be. Oftentimes, if I'm trying to bounce back from a failure on the way to chasing one of my ambitions, it's after that failure that I want to look like I have it all together, but I don't actually have it all together, especially after having quite a setback. And what he describes in this chapter is after you have a setback, really what you have to do is, don't take it as in And Bob and I and you kind of share some of the same worldviews when it comes to this, but don't view it as God shutting a door. I think that's a cliche thing that us Christians say a lot of times, is that God's shutting that door, so I'm just going to move back. But in fact, what we need to do is find a way to maneuver around that. And earlier in this book, he has said things such as, if there's a closed door, open a window. In other words, if there's a setback, find your way to and figure out how to maneuver around that. Don't let that stop you in your tracks and keep you from moving forward in the future. Because I think that is one cliche thing that us Christians say, is that God's shut the door, right, when really it's hard for me to imagine him playing, stop, go, kind of like that, like a police officer in the middle of the road flipping the sign, stop, go for traffic. I have a really hard time imagining that God is doing that with our lives. I do believe that he's intimately involved. I do think, of course, he pays attention to the details, and he helps us and guards us, as he talks about here in this chapter. But there are consequences in life, whether they're directly or indirectly in our control, and so sometimes things in life do happen. Just because we're living on this earth, and everyone's making decisions, and it's affecting other decisions that other people are making. So it may not be that God has shut a door. It may just be a setback, and we have to learn how to maneuver around that.
Right. There are a couple good points that you just made here, and one of them kind of that you mentioned, and I don't think Bob mentioned necessarily in this chapter, but it's kind of the conclusion that you can come to, is that when you come to a task or an ambition, and you're trying to look cool, and that's what they said, and you're too worried about how you look rather than what you're doing, usually, if you land flat on your face, you're actually more embarrassed if you just didn't care what you were how you looked beforehand. You know, right, what I mean? If you came into it worried about how you prepared you were, how you're going to handle it, not so worried about how you looked while you're doing it, then maybe you wouldn't fall on your face, in a sense, to begin with. And then even if you did, it wouldn't matter as much because you weren't so worried about appearances. So that's kind of an interesting idea behind that. Oftentimes if we're less worried about how we look, we actually make less mistakes. And then also, if we do, it's not that big a deal.
Right. Yeah. And when of course, the more mistakes that we make, the more maneuvering that we actually have to do. And this book, though, I think has been really inspiring to me, because we are, as you know, we're in the process of selling our house, which 2 years ago, we bought the house that we were in. We rented for a little while, and then we bought a house, and now we're selling and trying to move into another one. And my wife really, really likes this house. And so, of course, when it comes to the housing market and trying to sell your house, but also get a house at another time, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, there for failure to happen, because you hear a lot of stories of people trying to make that happen, and it just ends up not happening. And so when I was reading this chapter, I began thinking about that. I began thinking of ways. Okay, if we were to fail in either selling our house or in getting the house that we want, what are some moves that, my wife and I could make? And he says in this chapter, if you can anticipate failure and in your mind say, okay, along this path, we may fail, then I think we'll be a lot better off. And not to take away all of our hope and our excitement about that, but just for reality to settle in and say, okay, we may have to make some moves, and this may take a little longer than we thought, which is why, once again, as he's mentioned in this book before, the small ambitions that we can reach and those small goals that we can, kind of check off the list can add so much momentum to our lives. So while you're on the way to maybe some medium to larger size changes in your life, don't neglect those small things as well. He points out in this chapter.
And that's what he's talking about here. If you're ready for things, if you're not expecting, but if you're ready for things to go wrong, it's not going to be that big a deal when it does, and you'll be, you can better get back on track. You can get back on track a lot quicker.
Exactly.
That way, if you're prepared and you're ready for possible failure, possible setbacks. And that's what he said again, and you mentioned a little bit earlier, is that sometimes setbacks are just setbacks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's nothing so profound or spiritual or mystical about running into a problem or a setback.
Right.
Sometimes it's just a setback.
It's just a setback, yeah.
And there's nothing more than that. And sometimes we think, like you said, oh God, shut the door or something like that. And sometimes maybe you're just not as good as that thing. Maybe you just weren't prepared enough. Maybe you're not as good as you thought you were. If you were being really, really honest with yourself. Maybe it's just not for you. Maybe that's not your strength, your sweet spot, It could be a lot of things. It's not necessarily, God shutting a door.
Right.
Or maybe it's just some kind of obstacle in the road that you just need to hop over, you know what I mean? Just because you're not good enough now doesn't mean that you'll never be good enough. You might just have to put some more work into it.
Yeah, I think we can also be really inconsistent in saying that God has shut this door, God has shut that door. I think we oftentimes say that when there's something we really want, but then we don't get it. And I think sometimes we use it as an excuse to not continue to push forward. And so really Bob is saying in this chapter, and for anyone listening, chasing an ambition, don't let those setbacks, end your journey. They're just setbacks. You're going to have to make some moves, overcome that obstacle, as you just said. And but I think just looking at my own life in the past, when I've said, well, maybe God has shut that door, I think I've said that because it's something that I really wanted. But I don't say that in every situation. We never say that in every situation. And so we can be a little inconsistent with that. So I'm glad he points that out here.
Right. Yeah. And this kind of ties into that. This isn't from the chapter or anything, but I was listening to something here recently. And oftentimes now, in today's day and age, where we want things easy. That's our go-to. And Bob mentioned that in a few chapters ago, talking about we are prone to comfort. That's our default, is seeking comfort. And that's definitely what we do. But there's a beauty in the struggle. You know what I mean? And there's actually the most meaningful things come out of that struggle, like he's talked about in previous chapters. And that's kind of what he's, again, picking up on here, is that through these setbacks and stuff, it's just kind of, it's not a setback in that it's kind of a negative. It's just that it's going to take more work to get there. And it's just going to, because it's more work, it's just going to be more meaningful when you do get there.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I think you're right. I think when we start off accepting the fact, okay, we may have some setbacks here, and then they do come, and I think that grinds you a little bit more. I think it refines you a little bit more, kind of like what you were just saying there, that through those setbacks, I think questions and opportunities arise even in setbacks that wouldn't have arisen if you wouldn't have had that setback, that then you can meet that challenge head on. And then, like you just said, I think you're right. Once you arrive to that point, you're so much more thankful that you continued to push through, because and then at the very least, now you have a story that you can share with other people when you hear that they have setbacks, and you can say, hey, I didn't give up in this moment. When I was chasing this ambition, when I was trying to reach this goal, chase this dream, and this is how it turned out for me. And so I think we could really use that to encourage other people.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And when we don't focus on how we look while we're doing it, we can, chances are, get past those setbacks a lot quicker.
Exactly.
Than if we were so focused on our appearance.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's go ahead and pull out the book here and take a look at some of our quotes that we'd like to point out.
Yes, I love this story. He starts off with where, and I've been where him and his son are where they're going down the rapids of the Nile, and he said that within the first 10 minutes, the guy said, we're coming up on Class 5 rapids, which I've only ever done this myself one other time, and it was a Class 3.
Whitewater rafting?
Whitewater rafting, yeah. Okay. And so it was a Class 3, and I thought that was pretty rough. And I thought it was funny, he had never been before, and so he heard Class 5, and then figured out later there is no such thing as Class 6. But he starts off with this story, and he says at the end of that story that failure can be a lot like the river and those rapids. We set out after the big ambition and get swept downstream when we do something that flings us overboard. So again, this setback that we've been that we've been talking about. He also says that you're going to fall out of the boat once or twice on your journey. He says a setback is a failure we need to understand. It's an obstacle we need to navigate around or through. That there are going to be, as we mentioned earlier, big, huge public deliberating setbacks, and there are small, more pedestrian ones as well. But we got to figure out how to frame each one. How to overcome them. And also, what that framing does for us is it kind of sets into perspective, okay, this is a setback, but how does this fit, and how can I maneuver around this as I look at the overall picture? Because he also says that no setback is permanent if we say it's not, and I found that so insightful, because we are the only ones who say that a setback is permanent or not.
Right.
We're the only ones who decide whether or not that keeps us back or not. God doesn't do that. We do that for ourselves. If we say it's permanent, it is. And so I think sometimes stopping when we do have a setback for a minute and looking at the overall picture can help us re-engage and figure out a way to navigate.
Right. And kind of the temptation to put it on God, say that God shut the door or something like that, is to pass the ball. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The ball's in God's court. You know what I mean? It's
all
not
on
in
you,
ours.
man.
But that's what Bob's saying, is that the ball's in your court. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's up to you. And you are the one who has to decide, is a setback permanent or is it not?
Yes.
And oftentimes maybe it's because we want to shift it, we want to push it off of us because we don't want to take the responsibility for it. We don't want to put the extra work in to get past that setback. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's when you need to stop and realize, okay, wait a minute. If this setback has come and I don't really want to continue moving forward now because of this, is this something that I should quit? Because if it's something that when we step back and look at the overall picture, if we say to ourselves, okay, I really don't want to continue forward, then maybe it's really not a dream or an ambition that we need to be chasing. And, that's a decision that only, you as an individual can make. But that could be a hard pill to swallow, so to speak.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that he says here that people who successfully do this, who successfully chase their ambitions, they're willing to lay aside some of their own pride to get there. And how often do we think of that? You know what I mean? I think we think about, we're doing what we want to do, or we're chasing our ambition, something that we really want. Are we really thinking that it's gonna actually hurt our pride if we do it? You know what I mean? I don't think we consciously think of that. I think we probably intuitively know it, and that's probably part of the reason that we push back from actually chasing the things we want and working towards those things, is because we don't want to lose our pride. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And because there's some things, that if you're worried about appearance, they'll stop you from doing, when it comes to, chasing goals or dreams, because you're worried about how it looks. But if we're willing to actually lay down some of our own pride, we can make progress a lot quicker and we can bounce back a lot faster. And if in this situation of Bob getting, taking a motorcycle test for his motorcycle license, he would, if he laid down, his pride quicker and just started out with choosing the Vespa for his test, he would have passed it the first time.
Right.
And he wouldn't have had the, extra dose of humility in failing the test.
Right. I think we're, as you were talking and again, bringing up, the subject of, us being concerned about our appearances, it may reflect back on the comparison chapter that he had earlier in the book, because we will find that we're much more concerned with appearances if we keep ourselves busy comparing ourselves to other people and comparing the backdrop of our life to the snippet photo of someone else's. And so I think when we do get inside of that comparison trap and get in a habit of saying, oh, those people never fail, even though that's not true whatsoever, they just don't show those failures on their Instagram page. When the more and the more that we spend in that comparison trap that we spoke of in those earlier chapters, then the more and more we'll be focused on our appearances. The more and more we'll be, thinking about, okay, how do I look while I'm doing this? Because I see how everyone else looks when they're chasing dreams and ambitions in their life, and everything looks fine. But we have to understand, for very little people, or really for no one, is everything going perfectly and as smoothly as possible, or as they hoped or dreamed. Right.
And this stuff can keep us from getting started, but it can also stop us from finishing if we do get started.
Yes.
Because he talks about here, maybe you start something, and as soon as it starts to look stupid, you know what I mean? You're like, all right, I'm done. Whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, you don't follow through, because at some point it's going to start, people are going to be like, oh, what's he doing? That looks kind of weird, or whatever.
Right.
That if we're too worried about what other people think, we're going to start something, and as soon as it starts looking weird to other people, we're going to be like, all right, I'm out.
Yeah.
And you don't follow through, whether he says here, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, you don't follow through. So then you turn into a person who just starts things all the time, never follows through.
Yeah, and if we're one of those people that really needs to get some help in kind of starting things, I think one good place to start is to start small. He says later down this page that when the big waves hit, the ones that can sweep you out from the shoreline of your dreams, you can respond with grit and grace or choose to give up. He says, pay attention. The small lessons are the ones that will prepare you for the big attempts. And then he says you need to decide in advance what you're going to do when you encounter a setback. And so he says here that the small lessons are the ones that will prepare you for the big attempts. And so I think if you're having trouble starting, chasing an ambition or a dream, then I would say start small, and through starting small, you kind of learn some of these small lessons, and it's really these small lessons that prepare us for the big attempts. And I love that he includes in here also that it's also setbacks that also kind of prepare us for, I think at least, these setbacks that we may have on our way to these bigger ambitions do prepare us to arrive us at the place that we want to be.
Right, and that's the good news. He says that here, that it's not wasted. No setback is wasted.
No.
And he said actually learn from your successes and learn from the setbacks.
Yes.
Then he also adds, don't over-identify with either.
Right.
Right. So don't over-identify with your successes. Don't over-identify with your failures or setbacks as well. Learn from them both, and then move on, because then what you've learned from either the successes or the setbacks can help you the next time around.
Yes.
And that's the good news from it, is that it's not wasted, that we can actually learn from it and move on and do better the next time because we've learned that lesson.
Exactly. We talked about the God thing a little bit earlier before we opened the book. One thing that I love that he says is that hitting a couple of road bumps doesn't always mean God is trying to send you a secret encrypted message. Yeah. Sometimes we think that's true, that we hit a road bump and we're like, maybe God is, or I've heard something similar in the past before, that maybe God's trying to send a fork in the road, like we're going this direction. He kind of wants us to go that direction, but he says that doesn't always mean that God's trying to send you a secret encrypted message. Maybe he says what you tried didn't work out the way that you hoped. But as you said, in God's economy, nothing is ever wasted. Not your pain, not your disappointments, not your setbacks. So we really don't have to see the pain, the setbacks, and the disappointments as a misuse of time or as worthless.
Right.
Because they're certainly not. They certainly can be used.
Right. It can actually be a good thing, because later down the road, you might be able to tackle something that's a little bit more difficult and not run into as many setbacks, because you already faced some along the way earlier.
Exactly.
That you've learned how to manage and get past.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's kind of a reimagining and changing the, I guess, paradigm on how you look at setbacks.
Yes.
You can look at them as negatives and be afraid to even come across any, or you can use them as positives and use them to your advantage down the road.
Yeah. And that's all of chapter 25. Tomorrow we'll be in chapter 23, chapter 26. I almost said chapter 36. There are not 36 chapters in this book, but there is an epilogue after chapter 29. Anyway, and his numbers after that, so give him a call. Chapter 26 is next. 3 epic fails.
Yes, 3 epic fails. That'll be tomorrow. If you guys listening have any thoughts for this chapter, pick the Vespa, feel free to reach out to us at Read to Know Pod on all social platforms. readtoknowpod@gmail.com as well if you want to send an email. Also, real quick, I thought I'd mention this. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to support what we're doing here, hopefully keep this as sustainable as possible long term, you can do so if you go to readtoknowpod.com/support. And on that page, there's some merch available. You can get a nice, really cool Read to Know mug.
There.
I have one on the way, and I'm
Nice.
excited to get it.
Nice.
It's on the way. And I also have a phone case, Read to Know
Cool, dude.
phone case coming. So I'm excited to put that on my phone
Nice.
as well. There's also a Patreon link there. I don't have any. I have one tier there right now. One Patreon tier. I'm gonna try and add more. I got to figure out what would be worth adding because I don't want to just do something that's just kind of like I want whatever those tiers to be like good and to be worth it for the people listening and supporting.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out what that is, what that would be. So if you have any ideas for Patreon tiers, you can also let us know. Send us an email, readtoknowpod@gmail.com. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well. But that is there if you would like to support, and it would help out a ton. It would go to production costs to keep the website up, manage the episodes, the time invested, all of that, the gear, all of that. So, we want to make this as sustainable as possible long term, and that's one way to do it. So if you've been enjoying it and you feel like supporting us, we would appreciate it immensely. And yeah, you can rep some really cool.
There's some cool stuff on there. Yeah, there's some cool merchandise on there. I am getting a sticker. I thought about the phone case. I'm definitely getting a mug. I haven't ordered it yet, but I'm starting off with the sticker because I love a good sticker on my laptop. So I'm getting that, and who knows? By the end of it, at the end of my shopping spree, I may have also included the bath mat in there. So we'll see what we get. There's a bath mat. There's all kinds of things. There's a mask, if you have to wear a mask for work, support the, and then people see your face and they're like, Read to Know. It's a conversation starter too. And so if you're looking for an opportunity to tell someone about your ambitions, like Bob tells you to do in this book, well, plaster Read to Know on your face and that'll get a conversation started.
I think that would get a conversation started. Yeah, Read to Know. Read to Know bath mat. That's my favorite one, really.
I know. I need to convince.
I wish I needed a bath mat because then I would get it. I just don't need a bath mat right now.
Well, we're going in the house. If we get the house we're hoping for, we're going from 2 to 3 bathrooms. So if we're going from 2 to 3, hopefully I can convince my wife to at least put Read to Know bath mat in one of those.
I tell you what, if you move, I will gift you a Read to Know bath mat and a Read to Know shower curtain. I'll gift both as a housewarming gift.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Anyway, with all that being said, I think we should wrap it up for today.
Yeah.
So thanks, guys, for listening. We appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow for chapter 26.